All right, so again, make sure you have your Cornell note paper and you're ready to take your notes. Today's date is January 21st, 2015. Our topic is still graphing integers. Today we're going to focus on ordered pairs that have fractions and decimals. And again, our essential question is also the same. Why is it important to know how to graph and read a coordinate plane? So first, let's look at labeling the axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. We're going to look at fractions. So here we have a horizontal number line, which will be our x-axis on a coordinate grid. So the question is, what are the coordinates of the points A, B, C, and D below? So let's do point A together. Well, when you're dealing with fractions, you first want to count how many spaces there are between the whole numbers. So here between the whole number 0 and the whole number 1, you would count 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Between the whole number 1 and the whole number 2, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Again, between the whole number 2 and the whole number 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So there are 4 spaces between the whole numbers. This number will become our denominator. And since we're looking at point A, we're going to then count the number of spaces it takes to get to the letter of the location of point A. So again, we're going to count 1, 2, 3. It takes 3 spaces to get to point A. This number is your numerator. So the location of point A is at 3/4. Now we're going to look at the vertical axis, which is our y-axis. And again, what are the coordinates of the points W, X, Y, and Z below? So let's do point W together. Again, you want to still count how many spaces there are between the whole numbers. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. Again, between 1 and 2, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. Now here, it does not mean between 2 and 3 that there's only 1, 2, 3 spaces. You have to understand the number line will continue going up, so that means when you get to the whole number 3, there will still be 5 spaces between the whole numbers. And again, this number is our denominator. Then we want to count the number of spaces it takes to get to the letter of the location, the location of the letter W, which is what we're looking for. So we're not going to start at 0 and count how many total spaces it gets to go to 0. We're going to go to the nearest whole number. So since our nearest whole number is 2, we're going to start here and count how many spaces it is away from the whole number 2. And it is 1 space from the whole number 2. So again, since W is past the whole number 2, it is going to be a mixed number. So we're going to have a whole number and the fraction of where point W is. So the location of point W is at 2 1/5. So here you have your coordinate plane. And again, when you have your coordinate plane, you'll usually see that you have a larger tick mark for your whole numbers, and then all the other ones in between are slightly smaller, indicating that you have fractions in between those whole numbers. So here we have our x-axis labeled, and we have our y-axis labeled. Point L is located past the whole number 1, so it's going to be a mixed number. And there's 1, 2, 3 spaces between the whole number, so that's going to be our denominator of our fraction. And since L is at the first space, that's going to be our numerator. So the x-coordinate of the location of L is at 1 and 1/3. And we're going to go up our y-axis, and it's located at the whole number 2. So the ordered pair for point L is 1 and 1/3, 2. Point M is located again past our whole number -3. So it's again going to be a mixed number, and it's at the first space. And even though you don't see 3 spaces, this number line continues. So when it continues to -4, there will be 3 spaces between the whole numbers. So again, that's still our denominator of our x-axis. And it's at the first space, so that is our numerator. So where it is located on the x-coordinate is at -3, 1, and -3 and 1/3. And it goes up our y-axis to this point. It does not quite cross the whole number 1, so that means it's less than 1 whole, so it's just a fraction. And it's right there at half. So the point of the location of point M is -3, 1/3, and 1/2. The location of point N, again, along our x-axis first, and we stop here at -2. So our x-coordinate for point N is at -2. Then we go along our y-axis to see what our y-coordinate is. And again, it's past the whole number -4 when we go down, and it stops here halfway. So the location of point N is at -2, -4 and a half. Now we're going to label the axes, the x-axis and the y-axis, using decimals. It's going to be the same process as we did with fractions, just now we have to convert them to decimals. So again, let's do point A together. First, count how many spaces there are between the whole numbers. So I'm going to start here at our whole number 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 spaces between the whole number, 0 and 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, 5 spaces between the whole numbers 1 and 2. And again, since you do not see the whole number 3, this axis will continue. And when it continues and gets to 3, you will still have 5 spaces between those whole numbers. So this number tells us the denominator of our fraction. Then count the number of spaces it takes to get to the location of point A. We're going to start past our whole number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. It takes 4 spaces to get from the nearest whole number to our location of point A, which this is our numerator. So the location of point A is at whole number 1 and 4/5. Once that is converted, you can either divide 4 divided by 5 or multiply 5 by 2 to get 10. And if you multiply 5 by 2 to get 10 and you multiply 2 times 4, you get 8/10. And that written as a decimal is 1 and 8/10. Now let's do our vertical axes, our y-axis. Again, what are the coordinates of W, X, Y, and Z below? So let's do point W together. First, count how many spaces there are between the whole numbers. So here I'm going to start at 0, 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 spaces between the whole numbers. Which is our denominator. And then we're going to count how many spaces it takes to get to our location of point W. 1 space, which is our numerator. But Notice that it is past the whole number, -4, so it's going to be a mixed number. So point W is located at -4 1/3. When you divide 1 divided by 3, you get a repeating decimal of 3. So you can just round it to the nearest hundredth. So the location of point W as a decimal is -4 33 hundredths. Point A is located, again, past the whole number 1, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. And so 4 spaces written as decimals would be 25 hundredths, 50 hundredths or half, 75 hundredths, and then we're at our next whole number. So the x-coordinate of point A is at 1 1/2 or 1 5/10. And we go up our y-axis past the whole number 3, and this is 2 spaces, so each space is a half. So the location of point A is at 1.5/10, 3.5/10. Point B is located, since it goes nowhere along the x-axis, it stays at the origin 0, so the x-coordinate for point B is 0. And it goes down the y-coordinate, so it's going to be negative, and it goes past -4 to the 0.5. So the coordinate for point B is 0, -4, and 5/10. The location of point C is at 2 25 hundredths, and since it does not go up or down along the y-axis, that coordinate is 0. So the location of point C is 2 25 hundredths, 0. The location of point D is at -1 75 hundredths, 2.